Starting today, CRMLS, the largest MLS in the country, is implementing a seller concession field. This allows listing agents to input whether or not a seller is agreeable or will consider a concession, and if so, they can even put how much, and it can be a percentage or a dollar amount. Now I'll log into the MLS and show you where to find it and how to input it. Now also, San Diego MLS, which borders CRMLS to the south, they sent a letter out yesterday saying that they will not be implementing a concession field, at least not at this time. Now, whether or not you're a subscriber to either of these is not so relevant, simply because this is an example of what all MLSs all over the country are going to do. We're at this crossroads in the post-settlement world of if an MLS is going to publish a concession from the seller that's going to assist the buyer with anything from their closing costs all the way down to their obligation to pay a buyer's agent commission. Now, some MLSs will publish it, like what CRMLS is doing now, and some MLSs won't. And either way, there's a strategy for agents to move forward. Of course, it would be easier to streamline if sellers show up front that they're willing to engage in a concession, not just for buyer's agent's obligation for commission, but just for repairs or even a credit for the buyer's closing costs. So let me show you what CRMLS is doing, and then after that, we'll talk about the letter from San Diego MLS, because these two neighboring MLSs are basically an example of what other MLSs all around the country are going to be doing. Okay, here we are logged into my MLS dashboard. I'll click Add New to add a new listing, residential, start with the blank listing, and here we are. These are the tabs where you'll input the information for your listing. Now we'll click on the Basics tab, and this is where you're going to find the new concessions fields. And there are three of them: concessions and price, concessions and price type, seller consider concessions, and there's this handy little question mark, and if you check it, it gives you an explanation. It even tells you here that seller concessions are monetary payments, and they can cover all sorts of things that the buyer would otherwise have to pay for, like the cost of escrow or title, lender fees, repairs, property upgrades, inspections, and even the buyer broker fee. All right, so here you can put either a dollar figure or a percentage. And how you determine that is, let's say we'll do $5,000. That's not going to cover very much these days, but we're just using a made up number as a sample. Now we put the dollar sign here because we're saying it's the type is going to be a flat fee, a fixed amount, rather than a percentage. And naturally, you'd click yes if you're already filling this out. Now, I think the reason that there's this seller consider concessions is that there will be sellers that don't want to commit to any figure here. They don't want to show their hand, so they might just say yes, which will prompt you as a buyer's agent to make a request in your offer. But for those sellers that are willing to just say, yeah, I'll do 1% or 2% or whatever of the sales price, you can just put 2%. This, of course, would be yes. And that's it. It's very simple. Now, again, there will be sellers that will say yes and put nothing here. Now, what if a seller says no? Of course, that can happen. Or this could be blank like this, because this is a totally optional field. That's fine. None of this should preclude a buyer's agent from requesting a credit or a commission, because think how it's done nowadays, okay? Or up until this point, there was never this field here. There was never a concession price where the seller upfront pledged for a seller credit to buyer's closing costs, or all the seller credits we've seen as agents over the years. Those were requested when we drafted an offer. We asked in the offer for the seller to credit buyer $5,000 toward closing costs or something like that. So even if this is omitted by the listing agent and nothing's here, buyer's agents just write in the same thing you would before. Ask for a seller concession in the offer. Now, when the new offers get released in June, I'll show all sorts of different ways to write offers to make sure that you get paid, and we'll try to make it as simple as possible. But I just want to show you here what this looks like. Now, we'll jump over to a listing, and I'll show you where you'll find it on the listing itself. Okay, here's a new listing I just pulled up, days on the market 0. Now, because nothing officially changes until August, you're still going to see a buyer's agent commission right here, 2%. But now we see these new fields so that we can get used to it and know where to find them when the time comes in August, when seller concessions are going to be offered more often. And you see it right here, concessions and price, and this is going to have either that dollar figure or a percentage that whoever inputted the listing is already going to put that number in, or maybe not. Maybe they'll leave this blank and they'll just put here yes or no, or leave it blank. But this is where you're going to find it, up here. So yesterday, a letter was sent out by the CEO of San Diego MLS, and this makes a nice example to contrast what CRMLS, the largest MLS, is doing, because they're taking the initiative to come up with a solution on how the industry can move forward in the post-settlement world. And for that, I applaud them, despite all their flaws. Now, this neighboring MLS, maybe because they can watch CRMLS go and act as the guinea pig, and they can see if that attracts any negative attention. But I'll just briefly skim through this letter from their CEO, who basically says, in times of uncertainty, now after consultation with industry and legal experts, they believe it's prudent to err on the side of caution. Well, they had that luxury because CRMLS is actually taking initiative. So being that they're a smaller MLS that isn't under the pressure of time, because nothing's implemented until August 17th, almost 3 months away from this implementation date. So they can sit back and they can see if CRMLS's actions draw any negative attention. And so they're saying that they're going to leave the cooperating broker compensation field until at least August 1st. Okay, of course. I mean, so are the other MLSs. There's no reason to take it away any sooner, but they're not going to add a concession field because they think it's moving too quickly, and there could be a cause of confusion. I'm just skimming. I'm taking keywords from this letter, and they're saying we believe that our approach will benefit and protect everyone because they're going to wait, and that's pretty much it. Because the pressure's on now that CRMLS is saying, here's the future, here's what it looks like, and they're huge. CRMLS is giant. They're a giant in the realtor affiliated MLS world, and so by them taking initiative this early, over 2.5 months prior to the settlement, it allows other MLSs the luxury to sit back and let CRMLS possibly attract any potential negative attention. Any negative attention, quite frankly, is just absurd, because the case that CRMLS makes, and I'm speaking just in general for this is going to be a consensus among different MLSs, because I'm sure they're all talking about what each one's doing and coming up with best practices that they can share. So when CRMLS's chief legal officer comes out and makes the argument that a seller concession field is fully compliant with the restrictions of the settlement, it's hard not to agree, because seller concessions, they've been around forever, and they benefit the buyer to one degree or another. In fact, seller concessions in general, when they go to a buyer, it doesn't matter if they're if a seller concession is premised upon the name of seller repair or credit toward closing costs, it doesn't matter. A seller's giving a credit to a buyer, and that credit directly offsets how much cash a buyer needs to bring to closing, the funds needed to close. When a buyer's coming in at the end of escrow to deliver the amount of money needed to close escrow, the amount of funds needed is decreased by the amount of the seller credit or seller concession. So it doesn't matter what it's used for, it's all fungible at that point. And so given that the buyers now have an obligation because of the outcome of the settlement of paying a buyer's agent commission, that's going to be a standard with the buyer representation agreement. It doesn't matter if the seller concessions for closing costs or repairs or the buyer's agent commission, because these are all burdens of the buyer and they all come out of the same pot, which is the funds that the buyer's delivering to escrow. Given that this is happening more than 2 months prior to the August 17th deadline for the settlement to go into effect, I think it's actually a good test to model out how the industry is going to move forward and streamline the workaround with the new restrictions that come up and the new burden placed on buyers by the outcome of this lawsuit, and help us as real estate professionals alleviate the burden placed on buyers and streamline new best practices so that we can continue on assisting people with brokering real estate. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment.